Tithing is a very controversial subject. In the pulpits of our country, we've heard the word tithe used time and time and time and time again. And many a person has given the last dime they have to the church. And they felt that tithing was justifiable and taught by their preacher, and therefore they were right. They didn't take the Bible down to study what the Bible said about tithing. Some have used it to say that God is the only way of financial success in the world you live in. But they'd run into a big snag there. The richest men on planet Earth don't tithe. Others would say that you remove the curse from your life, and they refer the curse there as the devil, from your life, if you don't have, if you pay the tithe. Well, a lot of people pay the tithe, and the devil runs their personal character and life, so they don't get rid of the devil that way. Tithing, what does the Bible teach about tithing? Many would quote a passage in the 14th chapter of the book of Genesis, where Abraham gave 1/10 of the spoil of the war to Melchizedek, priest of the Most High God, king of Salem. Now let me call your attention to the fact that Abraham was not commanded to give that 10th of all the spoil. He was never commanded to give it. He gave it out of his own will and love for God. And that's the basis of the basis of real giving in all the ages of mankind. If you don't love God, you're not going to give. And if you give out of a fear that you'll be cursed if you don't, and if you give out of a commandment that you'll be blessed if you do, then you're giving with the wrong intent and wrong purpose. You should give because you love God, like Abraham did when he gave the 10th of all the spoil that when he conquered the kings to Melchizedek. When Jacob had surrendered his life at Bethel to the Lord, he signified by that stone that he laid his head on that he would give, all that God would give him, he would give 1/10 of it. This was a promise that Jacob made to God. Now, let's get one thing clear. It wasn't God's promise to him, it was his promise to God. And Jacob lived up to that promise. He promised that all that God would give him, he'd give 1/10 of it. Now, when the law was inaugurated, it designated a certain people to receive the tithe. You'll find that in the 18th chapter of the book of Leviticus and verse 24, where that the tithe, it should be given as a heave offering by the children of Israel, is for the Levi as an inheritance, because they received no inheritance of the land. The only ones that are to receive a tithe, according to the Bible, is the Levitical order. And you cannot find a Levi today to give the tithe to. Preachers in the pulpit today are not Levites, never were, and couldn't qualify. The Levi were a distinct tribe, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, and they had no inheritance of the land of Canaan. And the tithe system was to give them finances to support their worship in the city of Jerusalem and in the place that God planned. You'll find the place referred to in the book of Deuteronomy, the 12th chapter and verse 11, where the place that they would bring that tithe to. Now, it's called a storehouse in the book of Malachi, the 3rd chapter. It's called the storehouse of the Lord. Now, the storehouse was where they brought in cattle. They had cattle. They had sheep. They had goats. They had wheat. They had barley. They had all the increase of all the crops. Increase of gold and silver. It wasn't just where they give 1/10 of the gold and silver they had. They give 1/10 of the increase of the cattle they had. They give 1/10 of the increase of the goats they had. They give 1/10 of the increase of the sheep they had. And where they had the increase, they give that 1/10. And in the book of Deuteronomy, it plainly tells you that it shall be for the Levi and for the stranger, and the offerings, and the widows. It is not only for the Levitical order, but it's also for the poor and destitute. And I openly declare to you that if people had the right kind of attitude about giving today, they would never have a welfare program in this country of ours, and I don't believe they should have. But furthermore, they would wouldn't have to need Social Security a day in their life if they give out of their hearts. And give out of their hearts, because if they give out of their hearts, the church could take care of the poor and the needy. Now, the tithe system was made up not only to support the children of Israel, the poor among the children of Israel. It was a national taxation, as you might call it. It was a national taxation to support not only the priesthood that carried on the worship in Israel, the Levitical order, but also to take care of the poor in Israel. It was a national a law pertaining to the nation itself. And it does not apply to Gentiles, never was and never will. The tithe system was never given to the Gentile world. It was only given to the nation of Israel. And it was only given for the money that the tithe was always to be given to the Levitical order. It was to give to the Levi. The Levi was to disperse it to the widows and the poor and the needy and the strangers of the gate of Israel, to support the temple worship. May I inform you that that was the essence of the Jewish law and the law of Moses. But the same law that demanded circumcision demanded tithing. Come on. And if you're going to demand tithing today, why don't you demand circumcision also? And the same law demanded that you stone a man to death if he's not sprinkled with water. Why don't you stone people to death if they're not sprinkled with water? Numbers 19. The same laws that demanded that an adulterer should be stoned to death. If they stoned to death all the tithers in this country that committed adultery, you wouldn't have many people in the church houses. Let's get this straight down a fact. The Levitical law demanded the support of the temple and the support of the temple worship. Now you don't have the temple today, and you don't have the Levitical order today. Come on, you don't have it. Who are you going to give it to? They would have paid the tithe to the Levitical order. Someone argues that because Abraham gave the tithe, that in his lawns, the Levitical order were there and were subject to it. And they quote the Hebrew letter, where it tells you that very story, that Abraham, that the earthly order of the Levitical order, whose father and mother and beginning of days and ending of years, all was constituted in that earthly order. The Levi, father had to be a Levi, his mother had to be a Levi, he had to be a firstborn male child born in the household of Levi. The priesthood began at a certain time and ended at a certain date. Now, that in the lawns of Abraham, this Levitical order existed, and they became subject to the heavenly order when Abraham gave the tithe to Melchizedek. And they argue that, therefore, since it's recognized in the Philippian letter, this gives them justification to go back under the cover of the law and demand tithing. That's not true. That's not biblically true. Because the heavenly order the earthly order became subject to the heavenly order. And if that argument is true, then you're going to have to personally give your tithe to Jesus Christ. Come on. You're going to have to pay Jesus Christ 1/10 of all your earnings. But the Bible doesn't recognize that. Nowhere in New Testament writings is the tithe system ever taught for the church. Never was and never will be taught for the church. Now, let me show you some of the dangers of that. First is, a preacher preaches that you're to pay a tithe. He preaches that, and that's all you do give, just a tithe. If he taught that you give out of love, because you love God, you'd give more than a tithe. If you really love God. If you really love God, you'd give more than a tithe. You wouldn't stop at 10%. You'd go farther up the scale than 10%. And I doubt seriously whether a man is genuinely saved that gives God only 10% of the money that he receives in life. Come on. I doubt question whether he's genuinely converted and been genuinely saved, but he loves the cause of Christ enough just only to give him 10%. Isn't that a shame? Isn't that a disgrace to the name of Christ? Let me tell you, and the preachers that preach that tithe system teach that and bind their congregation up on a principle of giving only 10%. When if they didn't bind them up under the tithe system of the law and taught them that man under the new covenant should give out of his heart, give out because he loves God, give because the Savior has bled and died and redeemed him by his precious blood, and that the Savior is raised from the grave and is exalted